Good evening and welcome to Sean Henry Engineering. My last episode you might have seen, I spoke about how a conventional distributor works. On this episode I'm going to show you the contact breaker points that I explained last time, but I'm going to explain this time how to actually set them up. Now you might be wondering, what do I mean by set them up? I'll show you. So if we take the cap off and our rotor arm, take that off. Now, inside here, this is our contact breaker point that I was talking about last time, and it's being activated, as you might be able to see, when I turn the central shaft, activates it like that. Now, the bit we want to adjust is this little plate here, which is adjusted on this spring, which is actually, in fact, this nut and bolt here. Now, what we're measuring with that is that little gap in there where the spark occurs. Now, why do we need to measure that gap? So, if that gap is too small, either you won't get a spark at all, or you will get a spark but it won't be strong enough for the engine to start or run. Alternatively, if the gap is too big, then either the spark won't jump across it, or the spark will be too strong, which will mean that the points will not last very long, because the strength of the spark will cause erosion and pitting on the two contact surfaces, and it then won't be able to actually contact to break the circuit. So how do we adjust it? So I'll show you. So you'll see the gold screw in there, which holds that little plate there down. That plate is adjusted by turning this little nut here and here. So if we get our tiny little 7mm spanner and stick it on that nut, if we wind it that way, it winds the nut up the thread and winds that plate to shut the gap off a little bit. Whereas if we wind this nut the other way, wind it in like you're tightening up towards the head of the bolt, it pulls that bolt up like that and opens that gap up by pulling that plate. Now, how big does our gap need to be? Well, on most Renaults in particular, the gap is 0.4 of a millimetre, which is this feeler gauge right here. Might have to see that. So it's either 0.4 millimetres on a feeler gauge, or if you're lucky enough to have one of these around, which is a dwell meter, you can actually check it electronically with the electronic activity in the circuit. And to do that, you'd get your dwell meter, put it onto dwell. This one does more than dwell, hence it's got the options. And then you'd want the needle to be around about 55-60 mark. The factory specification for most of them is 57 degrees plus or minus 3. So 55 to 60, anywhere in between is pretty much bang on really. And to connect that up, you would simply put your positive feed onto the low tension circuit on the distributor, and you put your negative on a ground. And that's quite simply how that works. So I'm going to show you now how to adjust it with a feeler gauge. And this isn't perfectly accurate, but it does get you more or less in a right position so that it will run, because it means that your spark isn't too strong but isn't too weak either. The dwell is the most accurate way to set it, but firstly I'm going to show you how to do it with a feeler gauge, because it's the way I generally do it to set it so I can start the vehicle up and get it warmed up to check the dwell properly. So what we do is we take our feeler gauge, which is 0.4, and we place it in that little gap there between the adjuster and the arm. Now before we do that, on this little cam in here we've got 4 little lobes, and they stand for each cylinder in the engine. So imagine that spinning round massively fast like that, massive breakneck speed, and what's happening is that's opening and shutting. So the gap we want is with those contact breakers open, which is while they are up on one of those little cam lobes, which opens them up, and the feeler gauge goes between the adjuster and the arm like that, and we want just a little bit of just a tiny little pinch, just like when you do tappets, and you want just a little pinch, and then you know that it's just right. And that is touch on the loose side at the moment. So if we get our little spanner and we can wind that nut off a little bit, it should in theory drop us like that, and that is more or less spot on there. Do a touch more to be certain. There we go. You can probably just about hear that little scratching noise. That's just right. So that's doing it with the cam operating the arm. Now, the reason why the dwell meter is so much more accurate is because these old distributors are obviously all mechanical. They've got lots and lots of moving parts, and what does moving parts normally mean? Lots and lots of wear. So if you look at this, if I jiggle this from this end, you can see that's wobbling around quite a bit as it's turning. Now the only thing with that is that when it's spinning round thousands and thousands of times, obviously you're going to have a little bit of movement, which is then going to cause the cams to be slightly off position, just fractionally by thousands of inches, if that. But at the end of the day, it affects that points gap, and means that if you've done it on one and it's right, it's not necessarily going to be the same on every one of them all the time. In fact, they could all be completely different. So if you do it with a dwell meter, and I'll show you this later on, you can set it so that set it using the electronic activity, which tells us the angle in which between the lobes that it's shut for. Because if the dwell is too little, it will advance our ignition. If it is too high, it will retard our ignition, which then means that it puts timing out and then cause all sorts of other issues. So I'll show you the dwell later on. For now, that's how you set it up with a feeler gauge. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll show you the dwell very soon. I'll show you the same kind of distributor, but it will actually be in a car with a running engine. So look forward to that. See you soon.